My name is Stacey Simmons, and it feels so good to be back in my second home. This is the city where I really cut my teeth. I launched my career working for an LGBTQ youth program, Horizons, now the Center on Halsted. And later, I came back to Chicago and worked at Howard Brown Health Center. I was the women's program director. And then 9/11 happened. I wanted to go back to the East Coast and be closer to my family. In DC, I worked at Bread for the City in Southeast DC. Southeast. So Bread was a loving organization that served people with low incomes, and it was where I learned that healing can be reached through treating a person with dignity and respect. And regardless of who you are, or how you speak, or how you smell, or how much money you have or don't have, you deserve dignity and respect. So now I am so grateful for the opportunity to serve as the director for the task force's policy team. And it is truly a privilege to be setting our broad and inclusive advocacy agenda that really reflects the racial, socioeconomic, and gender justice values of our organization. On most days, I spend my time wearing suits or dresses like this and putting forth a professional image. But underneath the layers of my work drag is my own personal story. And it is one that is very closely tied to the work that I do here at the task force. I am a Black bisexual woman. And I am a Christian who also embraces Ifa and Wiccan practices. I was born in Queens, New York, born and raised, to a teen mom and a father who was stationed in Korea during Vietnam. 6 months after I was born, Dr. King was assassinated. So, y'all know I love Chicago. But I will always, first and foremost, be an around-the-way girl from Queens. And I'm sorry I forgot my bamboo earrings. I grew up attuned to the lyrical sounds of Jamaican patois and Spanish spoken with a Puerto Rican flavor. I spent my elementary and middle school years with classmates who were not known as simply Black or brown or white. We were learning together as Trinidadian, Dominican, Jamaican, Panamanian, Puerto Rican, Ecuadorian, Filipino, Chinese, Korean. I forgot the Europeans. Wait, scroll back down. Greek, Italian, Irish. That was not intentional. That was not intentional. I feel so lucky to have born in a place that many describe as the most ethnically and linguistically diverse urban area in the world. Now, my grandparents, they took care of their families on the money that they earned from working as a domestic for upper-income white Jewish households in Manhattan, a seamstress who made zippers all day in a factory in Flushing, a coal miner who risked lung cancer working in Pittsburgh, and a sharecropper who worked farms in Williamston, North Carolina. This is hard. I am the daughter of parents who raised me and my siblings on salaries that were negotiated via union contracts because they were civil servants with union reps who could fight to protect them as workers and protect them from unfair wages and shady employment practices. My younger brother is one of the many millions of incarcerated individuals living in this country. It is very painful to have phone calls with him and hear that constant automated voice that comes in to remind us that he's under constant surveillance and that this is a time-limited phone call. When I visit him, I can't just drop in. We need permission from the facility, and even then, after permission's been granted, we drive several hours to see him, and our face-to-face visit is still not guaranteed. So as a lobbyist, right, I'm on the Hill frequently, meeting with members of Congress and their staff. The bitter reality is that just like visits with my brother, these are also by appointment only and require security clearance before I can be admitted. But as you know, they are very different experiences. If you were in the plenary last night, you know that I lost a loved one, and what that means, what I carry with me, is that watching the news about the heartless murders that happen day in and day out all across the nation, I don't have to imagine what it feels like to have your loved one taken away from you. All of this experiential stuff is what grounds me. That, combined with my lineage, makes me so keenly aware of the power of our personal stories and our multiple identities. And at the task force, I am blessed with a dream team. Not all of them here. Together, the work that we do ranges from influencing legislation to developing winning strategies to showing up for direct actions. And as you know, these are very interesting times. The Supreme Court that granted marriage equality and reaffirmed fair housing and Obamacare has also gutted the historic Voting Rights Act. And now let's see what they do with the upcoming immigration case, right? And the other cases on their docket. Our organization launched an LGBTQ voting rights toolkit so that we can galvanize folks in our community during these months and weeks and days leading up to the November 2016 elections. And with President Obama's administration preparing to close the chapter on an era of unprecedented leadership on behalf of LGBTQ rights, there is so much at stake. And one thing's for sure, we cannot afford to go backwards. In fact, we are just getting started. We won't stand for a partially inclusive vision for our nation. It's why we're pushing for passage of critical legislation like the Equality Act and calling on ICE to stop raiding our communities and calling for radical change to the criminal justice system. This is what we're calling for. A bunch of things. We'll get to that later in the program. But anyway, I hope I've been able to give you a glimpse, both personally and professionally, of where I'm standing. I am at the intersection of multiple identities that at times may even be at odds with one another. And right now, our LGBTQ movement is polarized, and it's getting in the way of the work that we need to get done. And I don't have all the answers. My wife knows that. And I'm by no means perfect. She knows that too. But all I can say is to all of you, I am committed to using my own Black girl magic to help manifest as much power and justice for all of us as humanly possible. Thank you.
everyone. My name is Candance Bond-Theriault, and I am the Policy Counsel for Reproductive Health, Rights, and Justice at the Task Force. As I stand here and reflect on this past year, one word comes to my mind: violence. For me, this past year was marked by gun violence against the Black and brown communities at the hands of police, mass shootings and arsons at Planned Parenthood clinics, violence against trans women of color just for being who they are, the bombing of Black churches, and I am still grieving after, in Charleston, South Carolina, 9 innocent Black churchgoers were shot dead and killed in the name of hate. They welcomed someone into their world, into their home, only to be brutally killed. And for me personally, these senseless and tragic acts of violence are reproductive justice issues. For me, this is personal. I am a proud Black feminist. Every single day, I advocate for reproductive health, rights, and justice. And I am extremely proud and fortunate to be speaking to you on the 43rd anniversary of the Roe v. Wade decision. That legalized abortion in this country. Reproductive justice is a social justice issue. It is an LGBTQ issue. I believe that all people, regardless of who we are, have the inherent human right to decide whether or not to have children. For me, I've always wanted children. But to be honest, being a Black mother to a Black child in America is hard, y'all. It's hard. This isn't new. It's historically been hard. And maybe it's because I'm at the time in my life where I'm ready to have children, or maybe it's because the rise in social media and news coverage of Black and brown bodies being killed by police and harassed on the streets. But I'm more scared now than ever. And in full transparency and authenticity, I have to tell you that my husband is white and my kids will be biracial. And I recognize that my kids may have privilege that I never had in this country, but depending on the darkness of their skin, they will likely still be considered Black. And my fear of raising children in this country is a reproductive justice issue. I shouldn't be afraid to have kids. I don't want to be afraid to have children, and I really hope that one day I won't be afraid to have kids. I do this work so that I can raise kids without fear of how they will be treated on their way to school, and even worse, when they're in school. My hope is that the larger social justice movement will create a future so that my daughter, if I'm so lucky to have one, can go to school with pride in her Black girl magic, and I can have a son that can actually just walk home from school while wearing a hoodie. No matter how they look, the color of their skin, their style of clothes, their sexual orientation, their sex, their gender, all of our children need us to do better. We have to provide them a socially just world. For me, the state of our movement is at an unprecedented moment. Unlike the civil rights movements of the past, our millennial revolution will actually be televised. Our revolution's actually gonna be digitally recognized. And for us, the struggle will continue, but we will actually be heard. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Meghan Maury, and I'm Senior Policy Counsel for the task force. And sometimes, most of the time, I can't believe how privileged and lucky I am to be doing this job. When I was 18, I cooked up a shot of heroin, passed it to my girlfriend, and watched her overdose. And then I hesitated before I called 911. And I will never forgive myself for that moment. I know why I did it. We had like $300 worth of heroin and 5 syringes in the house, and I knew that she was a person of color and she would carry the consequences for my actions. And the funny thing is, we'd been clean for like 2 months before that night, but we'd gotten a phone call that day from a friend of ours who told us he was positive. We didn't know much about transmission risk, but we knew that we'd all shared needles a lot because it was hard to get our hands on clean ones. And we knew basically nothing about treatment, but we knew that we didn't have health insurance. So suddenly, staying clean just didn't sound that important to us. It didn't feel that important to us. And so before we even got tested, we got high. And I hesitated, but I did call. And the EMTs came, and with them the cops, and they gave her a shot that saved her life, and then arrested us both. With the arrest came eviction, and we ended up homeless, living in a car because it was safer than the shelters for queer and trans and genderqueer kids. And it sucked. We were cold all the time. We were hungry all the time. We stunk all the time. And seriously, we smelled awful all the time. It's hard to function when you smell awful all the time, but we made it through. I'm a lawyer now, and people ask me a lot. People ask me a lot, what was the moment? Like, what was the moment when you went from being that kid to this person? And I don't know what to say. There wasn't a moment. There were like 1,000 little baby steps. I finally got a job. I finally got an apartment. I got a different job that didn't start at 3 a.m. I got an apartment that wasn't over a bar that played Mambo No. 5 every time the goddamn jukebox ran out of money. I made my way to community college, undergrad, law school. So there wasn't a moment. There were a million baby steps and a whole lot of opportunities put in front of me, because even though I have a record and even though I have this history of heroin addiction and homelessness, my whiteness is a privilege that I hold during every moment. And now there are moments that I feel pride in almost every day. Like a couple of weeks ago when I got a call from a friend I work with on the Coalition for Syringe Access, and she told me that all this work we've been doing, educating Congress about our community's need for syringes and syringe services, that had worked. That Congress had just made it easier for folks to get access to those services that our community so desperately needs. That was a fucking moment. And that's my every day in this job. It's amazing. This year I worked with young people who are experiencing homelessness and housing instability and supporting their energy and their leadership and their resilience. And when the Department of Housing and Urban Development announced a couple months ago that they're strengthening protections for trans and gender nonconforming folks in shelters, that felt like a moment. And I've gotten to work on making it easier for folks who've been incarcerated to get access to jobs and care and housing. And a couple of months ago, the Department of Housing and Urban Development announced that they were making it easier for people with arrests and convictions to get into or stay in public housing. That was a really cool day, too. And then there was Monday, right? Monday, I'm sitting up in my hotel room here in this hotel, talking to the Bureau of Prisons about how people need access to affirming health care when they're released from a period of incarceration and are coming back to their communities. And they agreed on that phone call to include LGBTQ affirming health centers in their resource guide for people who are returning. That was amazing. But as all of these awesome policy changes happen, I just wonder what what our lives would have looked like if things had been different 20 years ago. If we'd been able to get access to clean syringes, if we'd known more about HIV treatment and transmission, if we'd been able to stay at shelters or get into public housing, if there had been more safe spaces for queer youth and youth of color. So that's what drives me. I'm not doing the kind of work that gets flashy headlines. There's not gonna be any HBO special on regulatory policy advocacy, although there totally should be, because it would be really, really interesting. But I know the work that I'm doing, it would have changed my life, and it would have changed the lives of the people I lived with, loved, and spent time with, so that no 18-year-old kid has to hesitate before they make a phone call that's gonna save the life of the person they're in love with. For me, the state of the movement is about working for all of us that have complex identities. It's about recognizing that we're all products of our experience, about centering the work on the needs and the voices of the people who are living with those needs, and about working every day to make moments that make real change for our community. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kayley Whalen, the Digital Strategies and Social Media Manager for the National LGBTQ Task Force. I'm actually up here to deliver remarks for my friend and colleague, Victoria Rodriguez-Roldán. Victoria couldn't join us this week because her mother died last week. And she's currently in Puerto Rico taking care as the only child. It's been very difficult on her. And I've been helping her with this time. I spent the first night that she heard the news with her right before coming to this conference. Victoria and I are family to each other, and we share many things. We are both trans, we are both Latina, we are both queer. I have family in Puerto Rico as well. And both of us struggle with a mental health disability, specifically bipolar disorder. And we are both called upon regularly to represent our communities, which is no easy task. So here, without further ado, I want to give her remarks. Hi. So, I'm Victoria Rodriguez-Roldán. And I'm the director of the Task Force Trans and Gender Nonconforming Justice Project. There are many ways in which I identify in this world. A trans woman, a person with bipolar disorder, a proud Puerto Rican, an aunt, a human being. This past year was an extremely important one to the trans community. For the first time, we are being portrayed in the news, TV shows, and movies more than ever, and in positive roles, not as serial killers, well, except one show. And yet, at the same time, this year, a year marked with such positive visibility, 23 trans women and gender nonconforming people were murdered, that we know of. The vast majority of whom were people of color. One of them was Keisha Blige, who was killed in Aurora, Illinois, a mere 40 miles from where we are today. Many more, including many in this very room, have been victims of violence simply for being who we are. Today, and for all the days to come, we make the call, trans power now, and stop trans murders. Many of the trans people who are being persecuted are young, In state after state, legislators have gone after the trans community, trying to criminalize us, often for merely using the bathroom. Very often, these laws attack trans children and teens in our schools, who are too often victims of abuse, both at school and at home, for being trans. Many of us, faced with both personal and systemic discrimination, struggle with mental health issues, including suicidal ideation. I know. I too, when I was 15, became part of that 41% of transgender people who have attempted suicide. So today, what I ask to each and every one of us who's been there is to not forget what it was like, to not forget that pain that we've felt, and to hold it tight, hold it very tight, and make the vow that no one should have to feel that pain, that no one should have to live through that, and that all those who come after us will have it better than we had. Let us fight for that day where no one will ever feel afraid the day they come out. We will achieve that day, even if the heavens fall in the process. And when I speak about all of us, I mean all of us. And that includes those of us with disabilities. And yes, I did just say the word disability, because many of us, LGBTQ people with physical and mental health disabilities, are being stigmatized, criminalized, and having our identities, our disabilities used to erase our LGBTQ identities. Too many LGBTQ people with disabilities are being exploited in sheltered workshops while being paid less than $1 an hour. Too many are being institutionalized, isolated, or kept under abusive guardianships. Too many are being relegated to the inspirational story while denying our identities. Too many are being discriminated against and abused, kept from many opportunities, and in many occasions, killed for their disabilities. We will always stand for disability inclusive advocacy, not for people with disabilities, but as and with people with disabilities. We will stand as the LGBTQ voice of the disability movement and the disability voice of the LGBTQ movement. The state of the movement is that when it comes to those of us in the LGBTQ disability community and in the trans and gender nonconforming community, there will be nothing about us without us. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Russell Roybal. And I'm a 7th generation Chicano. I'm a product of mestizaje. I have colonizer, indigenous, and Sephardic blood coursing through my body. My arrival here has been complex. The first people who came to this continent with my family name were expelled from Spain because they were Jews. They became Spanish colonizers that settled in the Southwest and intermixed with the First Nations people of that land and eventually became Catholic through the pressure and religious tyranny of the church. My family never immigrated to the United States. In the mid-1800s, the colonialist policies of the US annexed the entire Southwest, the place in the Chicano experience we call Aztlán, and we became Americans. We never crossed the border. The border crossed us. My experience could have been very different if those borders would have been drawn just a few miles north to the small pueblo my family is from in now southern New Mexico and West Texas. Yet immigration, in its modern form, still impacts me and those I love, and it's something I am as concerned about as much as LGBTQ rights, in particular, as a femme, queer Chicano, whose gender identity is complex beyond the male-bodied form you see in front of you. But as a person with the privilege of citizenship and light skin, my experience has been different than that of my abuelita or my tío or my primos, whose skin is darker than mine and have names like Jose or Roberta or Eduardo. The recent raids by Homeland Security and roundups of undocumented women and children hit close to home because many of those being deported look like my abuelita, my tío, or my primos. I remember the days of Prop 187 in California, where Latinos in the state would have been required to carry ID cards proving their citizenship. Or more recently, SB 1070 in Arizona, which did even worse. It reminded me of what my grandmother taught me growing up, to always carry my birth certificate with me. She grew up in segregated El Paso, where the signs on the buses that she rode every day read colored and Mexicans in the back. The raids are emblematic of an administration obsessed with deportation and criminalized the search for hope, opportunity, and safety. Thousands languish in ICE detention centers. LGBTQ detainees' safety is often in jeopardy without access to counsel or due process or appropriate health care. For their safety, or so we are told, LGBTQ detainees are kept in administrative segregation. But let's be real. These facilities are really prisons, and administrative segregation is solitary confinement. The government focuses on the most vulnerable among us, instead of removing white supremacists from native land in Oregon. The government raids the offices of Rent Boy instead of once and for all closing Guantanamo. Although democracy is a solution to these issues, democracy is broken and in desperate need of a makeover. The only real long-term solution is abolition. But until then, we must continue to press and insist the Obama administration and end deportations and detention. Not one more. The president has the power to do this without Congress, so that his greatest legacy won't be as deporter-in-chief. We can create a better world and a better future. We can end deportation and detention and tear down walls and create citizenship for all who desire. In the words of my mentor, Dolores Huerta, co-founder of the United Farm Workers, sí se puede.
We have been lied to. My name is Rodney McKenzie Jr., and I am the director of the Academy for Leadership in Action. And I'm over the lies. We're over the lies. My job is to lead the organizing, the on-the-ground work, the faith work that confronts the lies, the misinformation that has been used to harm so many of us. It was at my grandmother's funeral that I knew I had to come back to the task force. At my grandmother's funeral, the pastor, the man who preached lies each and every Sunday, the man who at 13 told me I was a faggot and going to hell, the one who preached each Sunday that I was an abomination, this supposed man of God who said I was wrong in the eyes of God, the one that my grandmother taught me to ignore and not believe, he willed himself right in front of me, blocking the sight of my grandmother's casket, and preached to 300 black folks that I loved, how immoral I was, how God cursed my name, how God was not pleased with homosexuality. Lies, y'all. Outrageous lies. He did not speak about the poverty, about the racism that was killing the black folks I loved. He did not speak about racial profiling that has locked up my aunties, my cousins, and my uncles. Instead of telling the truth, he lied about who I was and what it means to be outrageously big, beautiful, black, and queer. We have been lied to. We have been lied to. Faith has been stolen. We have been lied to. Texts have been pimped and betrayed to harm those who deserve justice, those who deserve liberation, those who deserve peace in the midst of racism, peace in the midst of homophobia and transphobia, peace in the midst of Islamophobia, ableism, classism, biphobia, and so much more. Texts have been used to say, I shouldn't be alive, that we shouldn't be alive. And I am so hurt. I'm so angry. And more than that, I'm furious. But, as a movement, focusing on the lies we have been told will not change our world. Only the truth of who we are, only the truth of who we are in our totality will create a world of liberation. So I decided at my grandmother's funeral to come out again. But this time as a person of faith. I came to the task force to reclaim faith, to challenge the notion that faith is white, to challenge the notion that faith is Christian, and take back a radical faith that calls forth a profound, non-binary truth, one that is at the core focused on liberation to the most marginalized. So as a movement, I seek for us to wage a sacred struggle. I want a holy campaign that seeks to heal the wounds and pains that we have experienced by those who would have us bow down to a theology that says that we're less than human. A holy campaign that sees the intersection of our struggles and a blessed quest that questions political practice that would seek to divide us. As a movement, I seek a struggle, a sacred struggle, against the lies that have kept us apart from ourselves and each other. A holy campaign to counter the corruption of religious exemption laws that were actually created to ensure that marginalized people could practice their faith without criminalization. But we know that once again, they have perverted these laws to harm LGBTQI peoples. But our truth is greater than their lies. Our queerness is greater than their lies. Our fierceness is greater than their lies. And if you don't mind, I have to say this to the 13-year-old boy who believed that he was wrong. The 13-year-old who thought he could never be loved. And so today, as a reverend, I say to that 13-year-old, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. And you, my beloved, are beautiful. You deserve love, and that you are the embodiment of the divine itself. We are, that 13-year-old boy, all of us, we are this movement. Those of us who have been criminalized and regulated to the outside, even by those who are allegedly with us. This is our movement. This is our movement, a movement that knows itself. This is our movement, a movement that recognizes its truth as brilliance. This is our movement, a movement that chooses to liberate our entire world. This, right now, in this moment, is our movement, and this is our time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.